Hello, I'm Martin Woodrow. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Dental Association. I'm going to round up the key COVID-19 issues this week for the dental sector. Well, it's been an interesting week involving PPE, the press and private practice. So here's a roundup of what's been happening. So starting with private practice, as we've covered previously, we've repeatedly written to the Chancellor to stress the urgency for action to address the problems that are faced by high street dental practices as a result of the crisis. Well, this week we worked with parliamentarians to get their backing, and 101 MPs from across the political spectrum and across the nations of the UK wrote to the Chancellor, and they've shared our message and called on the government to recognise the risks faced by the dental industry, and most particularly by private practices, if no resolution is sought. And that work with MPs is something that we couldn't have done without your help. So thank you again for those of you who individually contacted your MPs via phone, email and letter, and it really does make a difference. We published a blog this week by one associate dentist, Olivia O'Neill Dunn, who made her case to her MP and explained that how by ignoring private practice, the government was really endangering dentistry and the nation's oral health. So give that a read on our website. On that note, there was also a parliamentary motion tabled this week by Welsh MP Ben Blake, and that motion highlighted our concerns again and indicates that our message on the disastrous consequences for the dental industry and that's being heard. There's a lot of work going on across the four nations. In Scotland, we wrote to the Scottish Cabinet Secretary for Finance, again highlighting the vulnerability of private practices and requesting for help with business support. So there's a lot going on right now in the private practice messaging, and we'll update you when we hear more on that. So the second area I wanted to focus on this week was urgent care centres and personal protective equipment. So PPE was once again a huge topic in the wider news this week as focus intensified on supplies for frontline NHS workers. We're of course particularly concerned about the impact of supplies of adequate PPE in the dental sector and on urgent care centres in particular, which are now up and running across the UK. We're continuing to discuss those concerns with Minister Joe Churchill and with NHS England. I've got a couple of pieces that discuss the situation this week. One of those involves senior community dentist Charlotte Waite, who talks about working in an urgent care centre and her experience of trying to procure PPE. We also undertook a survey across last weekend and released the results of that at the start of this week. Many of you sharing your concerns about protective equipment and about working in urgent care. So again, thank you for your help on that piece of work. And that brings me on to press coverage this week, and we've secured a huge amount of media interest for our work in highlighting the issues faced by dentists, especially those working in urgent care centres struggling with PPE supplies. Findings of the survey I was talking about were cited hourly on the BBC's national and regional news throughout the day on Tuesday, and that same day you may have heard our Vice Chair, Eddie Crouch, on Radio 4's Today programme. Eddie really highlighting the frustrations felt by dentists over their inability to treat patients because they don't have the appropriate protective equipment. And Charlotte Waite also featured on the BBC News coverage later in the day. So if you haven't already caught up with the coverage, it's worth doing so, and we'll add a link to the pages below this video. So the next area I wanted to talk about was preparing for the post-lockdown period. And there's been a lot of speculation this week that the restrictions that are currently imposed might be eased at the end of the current 3-week lockdown period. And we're obviously thinking about how that affects dentistry across the UK. We'll be talking to administrations across the nations in the coming days to discuss what the provision of dental care looks like as we move ahead. For example, in Wales, as we go from red alert to potentially a high amber alert. We've also been having early discussions with NHS England about how we might seek to increase activity in a safe and effective way. And right now we're hearing from international colleagues who are dealing with this currently and sharing their experience with us, which is going to be invaluable. These are important discussions for all dentists, of course, including those in private practice who, of course, want to get back to offering more care to their patients. We'll report further on this in the near future. So a couple of final things. Firstly, we've begun the process of supporting the first round of pay resolution claims made by associates during the pandemic. Our pay dispute resolution service is available on our website, and if you remember, please do have a look and get in touch if you require it. And finally, we've got a webinar next week. Members all over the country are submitting questions in advance of our advice webinar next Wednesday between 2 and 3 p.m. So if you've got any questions, please send them in via our website. So that's all from me this week. Have a safe weekend, and I'll update you again next week.